Let us begin officially with a welcome. Hi, I'm Denis Greene, and I work with Church Development. It's a company I started in 1992. Seems like several lifetimes ago. In 1982, I worked for a company called the Support Center. It's an organization that helped nonprofit organizations across the United States. So I had the good fortune to travel and to work with lots of different nonprofits, from Red Cross to United Way to museums, medical schools, you name it. I learned how they worked. And then in 92, I was in a car wreck. Spent 7 months in traction. Had a lot of time to think and pray, and that's when I decided to start church development. And in retrospect, that car wreck was one of the best things that ever happened to me. Church development is a delightful experience. My old organization wouldn't serve churches. They were government funded, so they couldn't, and I wanted to. So that's why I started church development. Now, I am a nerd. I read a lot, and so I will bring some terrifically boring statistics to our conversation. I haven't read everything, but I've read a lot that relates to church stewardship, church capital campaigns, capital stewardship campaigns, stewardship efforts. I borrow from everybody across the country. Now, there's only about a dozen of us on this conference call today, so there's lots of room for your questions to be answered. And I share with you not just my knowledge and expertise, but that which comes from the dozens of people that I have worked with on our staff over the years, and the more than 200 church capital campaigns that we have conducted over the past 26 years. So among that, there's been a lot of failures, a lot of success, but a lot of failures. And I feel like I learn a lot from those failures, and I try to not repeat those. But you, in advance, have asked lots of questions that help penetrate, that will help you avoid the failures that I have made. So I will respond to virtually any question that you ask. It's all fair game. Now, church development is a national, I guess international organization now. We serve churches all over the world, primarily doing church capital campaigns. We also give away our stewardship information. I wrote a book a couple of years ago called The Stewardship System that talks about what are the factors that increase generosity without fundraising. And it's not about to be made into a best-selling movie starring George Clooney. As a matter of fact, my editor said it was distinctly boring. So go back and put some interesting stories in there. So I did. And unfortunately, that's what people tend to remember. They remember the stories of wrestling alligators and skydiving and a motorcycle trip across Africa. Well, so it's a little bit entertaining, but it's packed full of lots of facts and figures and case studies that will help you to avoid the mistakes that I've made, and help you unleash the generosity, the potential generosity that lays within your members. I'm a cancer survivor, which is one of the reasons why stewardship is so important to me. I recognize how precious not only every day is, but every relationship that I have, and of less importance, every dollar, every minute that I can volunteer, every dollar that I can give away. And every prayer that I can offer. So stewardship is burned into me, and it is something I don't mind at all. It made me a much more appreciative person. Now, I invite you to go to our website to look around. There's lots of free resources on there. Also, our stewardship system website. There are a lot of free resources as well that you can go to. Now, I'll begin with the first question that I referred to a moment ago. Why do I do this work? So every time I make a presentation to a group, somebody asks that, because it's clear I'm a nerd. I'm just so enthusiastic about this. And it began in 1979. I took a 5-day float trip down the Congo River and ended up in a war zone in Angola. I did not know that's where I was heading. Our boat docked at the Atlantic Ocean, the mouth of the river, and I walked north. I didn't know I was walking into a war zone. And I was greeted by 2 fellows with machine guns. Proceeded to quiz me about why was I there. You've got to be creative to imagine. I had brown curly hair back then. I had a brown beard. I was very tan, and unfortunately, I was wearing green pants. I looked like a Cuban mercenary who had invaded their little country. that province of Cabinda, which is separate from Angola by the river. And at the end of 2 hours, the younger one said to the older one, "We need to get on with our day." And he proceeded to raise his gun to shoot me. And that's the first time I prayed and meant it. And thank the Lord, the prayer took. Now I discovered in that moment that praying changes the prayer. It changed me. I no longer had an inclination to be such a reprobate, but rather to seek God's will in my life. And that's when my basic prayer practice started. To this day, it has those two factors of expressing my gratitude to God for everything that I have. And also, number two, seeking God's will in my life. It's a continually unfolding journey where I seek to understand God's will and to gather the strength to do God's will. Now, this slide is a little bit about our organization, which has been in existence for a long time. And we've had a lot of success, and we have many, many repeat clients. And it's a very fun business to be in. Most people don't like any form of fundraising, and everyone thinks stewardship is part of fundraising, even though it is not. But I enjoy it, and I've made a lot of friends. Okay, I already mentioned, type your questions in on your Zoom memo. And I think we already handled number one, but I would like to hear from you in the Q&A section. If you could just take 30 seconds right now, and I'll wait. It's difficult for me to wait quietly. But tell me something about yourself. How has God blessed you? And what questions do you have burning? And I'll sit here quietly for 30 seconds. Please take a minute and type and tell me just a couple of words. How has God blessed you? And then number two, what burning questions do you want to make sure I cover? So it's difficult, but I shall now remain quiet for 30 seconds while you type. Thank you. Okay, well, the answers are popping up. I can see them in my right-hand column. Good. We share an attitude of gratitude. And yes, it is based in Scripture. 1 Peter 4:10 is my favorite. We're all blessed with something. It's up to us to figure out how we use that gift to bless others. Okay, and I see a couple more questions. Okay, a couple of these questions appear that we've actually prepared for, believe it or not. Now, I think the first question, Meredith, can you help me advance my one slide? Okay, we covered that. Covered why do I do this work? Question number one, what can I do to begin the discussion of stewardship? Everyone thinks it is a money-only topic. Now, I received a question in my dialogue box that's just a little bit different from this, which says, everybody thinks fundraising is stewardship. How do we re-educate them? I will tell you the best possible answer, and this comes from the research that was done in the Wichita Diocese over a 20-year period. It's a group of 100 parishes, and they introduced one single stewardship education intervention, and that was to have lay speakers talk for 3 minutes at the end of worship services. Now, they didn't lecture, they didn't ask for money, they weren't dry, they weren't polished either, but they just said, what does stewardship mean to me? Now, they broke that down into 3 questions. Number one, how has God blessed me? Number two, how do God's blessings flow through me? In other words, what do I volunteer for? What do I pray for? And what do I give money to? And then number three, how did my life change once I discovered that God's blessings were supposed to flow through me? Now, I know in my life, frequently one of my friends will randomly say that they recognize that I'm a patient person, that little things don't seem to bother me. And when they say that, I remember back to that moment on that beach in Angola when I had a gun to my head. And I don't say it, but you know, this minor problem compared to having a gun on your head in Angola, I think I can handle this minor problem. I'm just happy to be here, happy to be alive, happy to be part of this. So that's my story. But every one of your people in your congregations have their story. They've got their own spiritual journey. So one of the key things you can do as an organizer is to find people who have a good stewardship story and ask them, would you talk for 3 minutes? Now, sometimes the culture of a church just won't allow you to have a lay speaker talking. It's just, it doesn't fit. So in that case, get your cell phone. I'm looking for my cell phone. Make a 3-minute video. You can email it out. They can do as many takes as they would like, but this is an area of discomfort for almost everyone. So let them practice. And when you've got those 3 minutes, you send it out. Now, we've done an experiment in the past where we had lay speakers talk at the end of worship services. Now, the week before, we hit a timer and found out how long it takes to clear people out of the foyer after worship services. Then we had our lay speaker talk, and we measured how long does it take people to clear out after that worship service. And what we've discovered was just that one act of having a lay speaker tell a personal story doubles the amount of time it takes to clear out the foyer. What does that tell you? That contributed to the cohesiveness of the community. We get to know each other better through story. So use that. Now, I didn't invent this. I've read about it both through stewardship resources and in the lay research world. If you'd like to read more about it, there's a book by Daniel Pink called A Whole New Mind, Why Right-Brainers Will Rule the World. And the last sentence of that book is his reflection on humanity. He says, we have a lot in common with a Cro-Magnon man who would sit around a campfire hungry for a story. Today, we humans are still very hungry for that story. All right, now let me flip to the next slide and tackle the next question. We're looking to communicate with some selected families that are not giving near their capacity. Do you have any suggestions on how best to go about this? Yes, I do, because I've had this failure circumstance many, many times. Let me tell you a story about a church I just concluded a church capital campaign with recently. We worked on their annual campaign before, we worked on their annual campaign after. When a church hires us, we're with them for years afterwards for their annual stewardship effort and for their plan giving, estate planning effort as well. So I just have a lot of insights into what works and what doesn't work. Now, if this is you, don't feel lonely. We all have this problem. In the secular world, there's a thing called a gift range chart. It's a pyramid, and it says in fundraising theory, you have one donor that gives you 10% of all the money you will raise that year. 10 donors who will give you 4% each, or a total of 40%. So from your top 11 donors, you have raised 50% of all the money that you will raise. And then in the next 100 donors, they will give you 0.4%. Cumulative total from that level will be 40%. So from your top 111 donors, you will have raised 80% of all your funds. Now, that doesn't apply to everyone, but it's not a bad expression of the Pareto principle. We in the church world experience our pyramids to be much flatter, which says that our upper strata of donors are not giving as generously as they could. As a matter of fact, the National Catholic average is to give 1.2% of one's income to the church. The Protestant average is to give 2.2% of their income. So in both circumstances, we have a great deal of room to grow. So everybody has this problem. I want to tell you about Trinity and a guy named Jeremy, who was the director of their stewardship. He identified their top strata of potential donors who were not giving to near their potential and invited them to dinner with the pastor. This was not expensive. This was not time consuming, but it was shocking to the participants. Many of them said when they got the letter from Father, and it was a very simple letter, said, I'm inviting you to dinner. I'm working my way through the parish. I want to break bread with a wide cross section of the congregation. Tell them what's going on with the parish and listen to their input, which he did. He started from the top, worked his way down, and worked his way out. Everybody in the congregation had a chance to hear his state of the church and to share their input. It was a wonderful community building experience. As Father shared the challenges of the parish and then listened for their input, annual giving went up by about 20%. Just based on that experience. Now, we had two donors that just leaped out and that blew my mind. One couple said, hey, that church, that's house right next to the church has been vacant and is an eyesore for a long time. What's the plan with that? And the pastor said, well, I don't know. It's there. Yes, it is a pain. Yes, I wish we owned it. Donor said, well, look, could I buy it? Could I buy it and just give it to the church? To which the pastor was delightfully surprised and, of course, was very affirmative and said, heck yes, we would love that. Please proceed. A second good example of what is sprung free from that dialogue. About 2 weeks after the dinner, there was one of the many couples that attended, called the office and asked to set up a visit with the pastor. And they brought their checkbook. And at the conclusion of the 15-minute pleasantries that were exchanged, the wife pulled a check out of her purse and said, Father, well, we've been talking about this, and we'd like to get caught up. We have not been giving much, certainly not to our potential these last couple of years, and our business has done well. We would like to share with you, with the parish, some of our blessing. That was a check for $100,000. That kind of thing happened over and over. We had a couple of big donors, and we had a whole lot of smaller donors who very gently and without much encouragement increased their giving. So the best thing you can do with that top strata that's under giving is engage them in dialogue. It's not difficult. It's not time consuming. Okay, let's go to our next slide. And question number 3, how do I get more people involved with stewardship efforts? It is always the same people. That's a really good question. Now, one of the things I learned from this researcher, his name is Zek. He worked at Villanova. Plus, I learned from the secular world, this author, Gregory Lawson, who wrote the book Give to Live. And I also, I'm a part of a nonprofit organization that examines nonprofit trends. And what we have discovered is, unfortunately, people younger than me tend to not make long-term volunteer commitments. There's a new phenomenon. It's called episodic volunteer opportunities. So if you're as old as me or older, you're probably comfortable with sitting on a standing committee that has a 1 or 2 or 3 year commitment. You're younger than me, you probably don't. So we have got to design and advertise episodic volunteer opportunities. First of all, never call them that again, okay? Give them a much snappier, easier to consume title. Brief volunteer opportunities, or one time, or one and done. And I advocate that you do 1 a week. Now, not many people buy that, but at least once a month. You've got to advertise, put it in the Sunday bulletin that says, we need 3 volunteers on Saturday the 12th to help us do ABC. Or we need 7 volunteers on Tuesday night the 15th to help us do 1, 2, 3. Now, people see that. They see it's got an event horizon, a beginning and an end, and they know what it's all about. Now, both Matthew Kelly and Gallup polling have scrutinized church membership. Matthew Kelly says he thinks there's 6% who are committed, deeply committed, who would serve on standing committees. Gallup polling thinks it's 15%, but both of those numbers are rather dismal. But we're really looking at between 85% and 94% of your members are not comfortable with sitting on a standing committee. So younger than me, less involved, forget standing committees. So look for a 1 and done opportunities and publicize the heck out of it. Make it fun, make there be food involved, offer childcare. We've got to really bend over backwards. Now, there is an enormous benefit to that. So when somebody is a volunteer, their giving doesn't go up a little bit, it goes up a lot. Matter of fact, the Fidelity Fund about 10 years ago did a study on that exact factor. What's the relationship between a volunteer and donations and a non-volunteer and their donations? And they discovered that active volunteers give 11 times more than non-volunteers. Isn't that incredible? When we design a church capital campaign, boy, do we want that to happen. We design many, many brief volunteer opportunities, and we advertise the heck out. you like to be on an events committee, a prayer committee, a thanks, a youth, ambassador, communications? We've got something for everybody. And most of those committees are only going to meet 3 times. You might only spend 3 hours over the next 4 months doing those things. So we've got a widespread poll, we've got good PR and marketing, and we focus on how quick and easy it is to get involved as well. All right, now the question number 4. This is a good question. My parish is hesitant to spend any money on outside assistance for our fall church capital campaign. What are the benefits of hiring a professional, and how would you explain that to the parish council? Well, that's a great question. And I get that question about just every week, it seems like. And that's about how frequently I am out in a church giving a sales pitch. So we give away a lot of our information, and what we hope is that when a church does a capital campaign, they invite us to come give a sales pitch. We know nothing is guaranteed, but it's been a good way to live a life over these past 26 years, to give it away, and eventually what you sow does come back. So when I do give a sales pitch, this is one of the first questions. Now, over the past couple of decades, I have collected data on churches that do not retain a professional. And what they usually raise is 50% of annual giving in 3-year pledges. So if your annual giving is $1 million, if you run the campaign yourself, the average outcome would be to raise $500,000. If you hire a professional, I don't know how much all professionals raise, but I can tell you about our experience. Over the past 100 church capital campaigns, we raise 2.5 times annual giving. So if your annual giving was $1 million, we would most likely raise $2.5 million in 3-year pledges. So right away you can do the math. If you do it yourself, you'll raise $500,000. If we were to work together, you would probably raise $2,500,000. That's a multiple of 5 difference. So yes, it is expensive. It's really expensive. A church might spend $80,000 or $100,000 employing church development and using our graphic designers and our writers and our web people and video people and the person who manages the campaign and the newsletters and emails and brochures and manuals and the website. And it really does take hundreds and hundreds. 700 to 1,000 hours would not be unusual. I mean, it's like a job. And we throw a team of people at that, and you do get results. So it's a little bit like farming. You just throw out a few seeds, your yield will be calibrated to that. If you do a thorough job of tilling the soil and planting the right amount of seeds and water and fertilizing and care, the yield is commensurate with that level of investment. So yes, it is expensive, but it does work. Now, of course, I'm going to be biased because this is my profession. However, I have denominational leaders around the world who echo my sentiments. So if you go to a denominational leader and you say this exact question to them, should we do it ourselves or should we hire a pro? They will say one sentence. They will say, if you hire a pro who has done this 100 times, they're probably going to raise more money. They are probably worth it. So that's a pretty good endorsement. And perhaps it is the same whether it is plumbing, electrical work, software design, tailoring, or going to a barber. My wife teases me mercilessly because I don't go to a barber. I have hardly any hair. So I just got one of those razors and it takes me about 30 seconds every couple of weeks. And once in a while, I will buzz a landing strip into the size of my head, and my wife will tease me for the next 2 weeks. That's what happens when you leave an amateur to a haircut. Okay, all right, next slide. How do I advance this? Okay, number 5. What if my pastor is not on board or committed to stewardship? Believe it or not, this is a fairly common phenomenon. And I got insight into that particular question from this book, Charles Zeck. It's titled Why Catholics Don't Give. Catholics are at the bottom in their levels of generosity, giving 1.2%. The only denomination that gives less on a per capita basis is the Unitarians, and they give 0.7%. So the number of Catholics is vastly larger than Unitarians, so let's pick on that group. There's a fear of talking about money. There is embarrassment about talking about it. And there is the confusion between what is stewardship and what is fundraising. Now, I find great comfort in the scripture I offered earlier, 1 Peter 4:10, which states very clearly the essential message of stewardship. Everything that we have is a blessing from God. Everything. I think about it as if we were farmers. We didn't create this dirt. God created this sphere, this earth, and we are blessed to have a spot on it. And it's up to us to take care of that blessing. Maybe we pass it on to the next generation. Then they become stewards of that as well. Now, that concept is very different from hardcore fundraising, going door to door, asking for a gift. So when we do a church capital campaign, it is prayer-based. You can do this with your stewardship efforts as well. Now, this guy is one of my heroes. His name is Henry Nouwen. And the title of this book, you know what? I can hold it up right there. How about that? A Spirituality of Fundraising. I've bought and given away hundreds of the copies of this book because I like it so much. The idea that Nouwen articulates in this book is that we can be a servant to the member by asking them to seek God's will in their life. Most people don't do this. Most people, me included, tend to be distracted by shiny objects. And we tend to not live a deliberate life. Thoreau said, the thinking, truly alive human being lives deliberately. He also said, most men lead lives of quiet desperation. Two of the leading psychologists in American history, some 50 years ago, in a debate, they both estimated that perhaps 1% of the population is deliberate about deciding the route of their lives. And I, as a spiritual, religious person, put that in the context of discernment. So I'm thinking maybe 1% of the population really does seek to discern God's will, and then deliberately act upon that. So we want to recontextualize for our pastor. Our annual stewardship effort is not fundraising. It is an educational effort about seeking to do God's will in our lives, seeking to better understand how we could use the resources that we have been blessed with to do God's will. So you've got to do that reframe. This past week, I attended a conference and I heard a neuroscience talk about change, and she talked about a wide variety of topics. And the one that really touched me is I'm overweight. I got to lose about 20 pounds. And she had a lot of data. She said no amount of cajoling or threats or worries or high blood pressure gets a person to eat less and exercise more. They have to reframe their view of that particular issue. And she was very helpful to me because it really began to get me to think about my children and my grandchildren. So I don't need to visit Foo's Frozen Custard that's just right outside of my window every month or every week. I think I could get by on once a month. Nor do I have to get a big one. I could probably do just fine with a little one. Because if I control that, there's a higher probability I'm going to enjoy my grandchildren longer. That reframes it entirely. So you have to reframe the issue for your pastor. It's not fundraising. We are helping our people discern God's will in their life. And that's a joyful experience. In our church capital campaigns, where I do all my research, the penultimate moment, I love that word, I learned that from my father-in-law, which means it's the next to the last big moment, is the time of prayer and reflection. So we do a prayer booklet where we have a dozen authors from the congregation write a 3-paragraph reflection on how they discern God's will in their life. And by far, it is the most popular part of the entire campaign. As I confess to you, I do it like everybody else confesses. The minute I get it, I read the first one, and it's awesome. And then I read them all. I'm only supposed to read one a day and reflect on the scripture, which I do. But boy, they're just so good, I tend to zip through the whole thing and sit there for half an hour and just soak it all in. So you can make this prayer and discernment process a very enjoyable one. And it's very different from high pressure, door-to-door fundraising, which most people think stewardship is. All right, let me shift to the next question. Here I've got one that just popped up. Do you have a suggestion for the Finance and Administration Committee? They deal with the day-to-day activities of paying bills, keeping up with what needs to be done and when, keeping the church calendar, and performance appraisals. Yes, I do. And the number one suggestion I have is please do not have them also be in charge of stewardship. There are two different mindsets. You really want the Finance and Administration Committee to be in charge of keeping things in order. And that is a very different function than stewardship. Stewardship is a lot more like planting seeds, and finance is a lot more like harvest. So we really want people in the stewardship effort to be creative oriented, marketing. We want them to be extroverts. We want them to be, oh, I learned a new word, mavens. I read a book by Malcolm Gladwell titled Tipping Point. And in that, he talked about the research about how communities shift in their decision making. And it's those mavens. My wife is one. She knows everybody in our church. She's volunteered for everything over the decades. And she's a very likable person, and she's an extrovert. Everybody knows her, everybody loves her. That's the kind of person you want on your stewardship committee, someone who can read the pulse and be a servant to the community. So let's not have the Finance and Administration Committee do that. Let's create a stewardship committee. Now, when you do that, Meredith reminded me, she said, make sure you talk about the stewardship system. I'll give that to you, it's free. If you have a stewardship committee, this is everything that they need to be a success. Every month they receive an agenda, a checklist, a calendar. They get 4 Sunday bulletin inserts. They get newsletters. They get columns that are drafted already from the pastor, from the stewardship committee. You get banners, solicitation letters, thank you letters, virtually everything that you need to run an annual stewardship effort. It is all there, and it's web-based. Web-based, you just click and download, and you have got it all. So that's kind of the number one reservation that we experience in the finance committee letting go of the annual stewardship campaign. But we really think that that's kind of critical component to success. So please let it loose. Find somebody, give them the stewardship system, and bless them as they go to design that. And this has been a very unusual thing, but it works all the time. I'm not going to say it's magic, nor will I say that it is mystical, but it's just well thought through application of just well-grounded research. And I told you we failed a lot. So we know what to not do. My son is fond of quoting Chuck Norris. And Chuck Norris has some good career counseling advice that my son now quotes. He said, number 1, figure out what doesn't work. And then number 2, don't do that. So we've incorporated that in the stewardship system. So if you've got a stewardship committee, give them the stewardship system, because it's got things that work, and it's fairly simple, and it's automated, and it's down to earth, and they can use it today, right now. Okay, now let me see if I can figure out how to shift to the next slide to see what the next question is. There we go, number 6. We are really needing some facility updates and want to do a capital campaign, but our diocese in the middle of one right now. What should we do? Gosh, we get this a lot. Now I have a great story that happened. I did 4 capital campaigns for one church, and right at the end, as a matter of fact, it's a church where I got married many decades ago, and it was after one of those campaigns, the diocese launched a capital campaign, and the pastor kind of wanted to protect the flock. So the pastor asked, do we have to do a capital campaign, or could we just write a check to cover our portion of that? Well, the diocesan director of stewardship just did a cartwheel upon hearing that. That saves a whole lot of time and a whole lot of headache, and it hits the goal. So they agreed upon that. Now, I've discovered, having done many church campaigns in many different dioceses across the country, in general, directors of stewardship in dioceses are very happy to accept that. Now, I've observed, and I collect data on diocesan stewardship campaign. I've worked in the midst of that for many years. And what I've discovered, if you do a diocesan A denominational campaign, the goal for the local congregation will probably be around 80% of that church's annual offertory, that church's annual giving total amount. That's how they set that goal. Now, they are very amenable if you want to do your own campaign and hire your own consultant and do it your own way that's tailored to the unique personality of your church, and then write the diocese a check. They are very happy about it. It's less work for them, less headache. So it can be a win-win. And I have seen it in multiple dioceses across the United States. And all it takes is for you, the person who would like to do this in your church, to go directly to that director of stewardship and present your case. And zero times have I had the personal experience where that was ignored and downplayed. So good luck. Go forth. All right, Meredith, what is our next question? Item number, question 7. We have a lot of energy and excitement about our new building, and people are eager to get started. It seems silly to spend money on a feasibility study with so much support. Do we really need one? No, you don't. So, should you do it? Well, that's another question. You know, this, as you know already, I'm a nerd and I like reading. The best practices in parish stewardship, best practices in the capital campaign industry is, yes, please do a feasibility study. I recently tore my Achilles tendon, and it hurt like heck. And I knew I tore my Achilles tendon, my foot wouldn't move. And everybody on my volleyball team knew I had torn my Achilles tendon. So when we got to the emergency room, the doctor took 10 seconds to diagnose me. But you know what? Before they did surgery, they still did an x-ray to figure out the particular unique circumstances of the intervention that was needed. Now I care about my body. I try to take care of myself, and I would expect that they do the best practice. Lord knows I pay enough for health insurance and medical care. So I want them to do the best thing. So from a theoretical perspective, it's the right thing. But now let me tell you a story about a church I was working with in Denver. And it was either our 3rd campaign in a row or our 4th campaign in a row. And we've done 5 with them. And so I can't remember. But they've been through a lot of changes. They sold their old church. They bought new land. They built it. They expanded it. They have debt. They're paying off the debt. So it's a big effort. It's a big, it's been 20 years of my life helping them. And we had that question in either the 3rd or 4th, I can't remember. But we said, yeah, we want to do the right thing. And what came out of that is we had a donor pick up a paper copy of the feasibility study. Now we email them out, you know, we do some in person and we email and we have paper copies, and usually only a few paper copies are used, and they're put in a business reply envelope and mailed back to us, postage paid. So there's very few of those anymore. In the old days, it was all paper. These days, it's mostly survey money. But on this, I read every one, and on this piece of paper in the margin, when we talked about money, a donor wrote in, if we could please purchase that little corner of land on the edge of our property that's overgrown and someone needs to deal with. I know it's not usable. We can't turn it into a parking lot or use it. But I myself would contribute $500,000 towards that. Well, my eyes lit up. And when I spoke with the pastor's eyes lit up. So guess what we did? We bought that land. And indeed, that family did give us $500,000. And I think the purchase of that little tiny triangle was only $34,000. And we're able to mow it and landscape it and make it a beautiful part of the architecture, the land surrounding the church. So it was a win-win for everybody. But it's little things like that that really suggest you really ought to do a feasibility study. I am kind of a delicate flower. I hate to be a failure. A feasibility study would help you understand what to not do. And I think that's awfully important. Okay, so on that one, we're going to talk about the finance and administration team. And they're, okay, we got a question about electronic giving. Um, I have 4 children, and my second daughter is a tall volleyball player. She's my third child, my second daughter. And I took her to visit on a church trip to New York City. And I have free frequent flyer miles, and we did all the touristy things. And during that church stewardship committee meeting, I was taken to task by a young woman who was a leadership donor on the committee. She said, Dennis, you are making it very difficult for me to make a gift to the church. And I said, excuse me, what are you talking about? I think that would be great if you gave. She says, I don't have a checkbook and I don't carry cash. So how am I supposed to give to the church? And of course, my mind was spinning, and I thought about the website. Do we have something set up there where she can click? Is it recurring giving? What do we have in mind? Well, we had none of that set up. So her admonition made me spring into action. So right away, we got text to give. We got online, we got a PayPal account. We got QR codes so that when somebody does a brochure or a newsletter and we're doing something fun and unique this weekend, we can put a QR code a person can click and send right away. Now, in the old days, when I started in this business many decades ago, 90% of the income came in the form of checks, 10% came in cash. And now that has shifted dramatically. So leading edge effective churches now have the majority of their income come in through electronic fund transfer. So should you do it? Yes. Now, the big benefit of that is you never have the summer dip. Giving continues. Now, the downside of that is that they tend to not increase their giving year over year. We've got to exert a lot of effort to encourage those increase in giving activities. So it's work, but it's really a good deal. I was in the cathedral in San Francisco a couple of years ago looking at the beautiful architecture. On my way out, there was a giving kiosk where with the little chip reader, I could just swipe, punch it in, and make a gift immediately. One of our clients gets 50 gifts per week, and the average gift is $50. So that's $2,500 per week, $10,000 per month from their kiosk. A kiosk costs very little to set up. Now, the ultimate electronic fund giving is to have a church app, so that when I've got my phone and I want to know what's going on at church, I just hit my church's app, and that's going to pop up with the recent bulletin, the calendar for the weekend, and it will always present an opportunity to give. So if there's something special, it's going to be right there on the forefront of that. And because they already have my data, I can just touch it, punch in an amount, and press give. So the rule of thumb for church stewardship activities is to make 4 asks per year. So I'm going to do my annual stewardship campaign gift pledge once per year, but I might also give to a choir effort. I might give something to the youth. There might be an emergency. So I might give 4 or 5 different times. It's probably a bad idea to make 52 requests per year, but it's certainly okay to do 4. And an app is your best way. Anyway, there's another seminar, webinar coming up, and I think we got a slide on that. Well, let me bank through these, and I think we got a couple more questions. So let's go back to that last one just a second. How much can we raise in a capital campaign? We just had the good fortune, success. My coworker Daryl just raised 7 times annual giving in 3-year pledges in one of his campaigns. Just before that, he raised 5 times annual giving in 3-year pledges. Looking back over the past 100 or 200 church capital campaigns we've done, the average is closer to 2.5 times annual giving. That would be a normal expectation. I'm working with a church right now that's going to do a big, exciting project. They will probably raise 3 to 4 times annual giving. That would be my guess. And then the next question we always get after that is, how much does it cost? Well, in the secular world, the secular world says it costs 10%. realtors charge 7%. Fundraising costs in a capital campaign tend to be 10%. We don't charge by a percentage, but our costs tend to be a lot lower than that. Historically, one of our coworkers did the math. We tend to get paid $1 for every $25 that we raise over our past 20 years. So it's not very expensive to do a capital campaign when you look at the ratios and the numbers. Okay, next. And I think we're coming close. As there are any last questions, I know we're supposed to end in about a minute, but I want to show you this book just because I love the title, and it is Not Your Parents' Offering Plate. Okay, I just love that. It's just so true. I'd encourage that you read this. I encourage you to read this. This guy got the Nobel Prize in economics. Thinking Fast and Slow helped me understand myself, and it helped me better understand the people that we serve. Now, in general, you can't say the word tithing anymore. It's unfortunate. That only works with people who are age 70 and older. The next word after that is stewardship. That's even too old a word for people who are under the age of 50. People under the age of 50, the next word that's going to be used is generosity. And then the upcoming word, as I've studied, I'm a fan of linguistics and Noam Chomsky, and how words really reflect the internal cognitive processes. The next word that's going to come up is going to be sharing. So if you say tithing to a 30-year-old, even if they're a multimillionaire, they're going to think taxation. So don't do that, okay? Remember that we are servants of those in our congregations. We are facilitating their dialogue with God. We're facilitating their discernment of God's will in their life. This is a hallowed responsibility. And we can do it. It's a big job, but we've got a lot of room to grow. So we will be a success. I am certain of that. Okay, so here's the webinar we were talking about. April 12th at 1 o'clock. You're invited. Spread the word, please. Push this out. Everybody needs to know this stuff because none of us do it very well. And one of my coworkers, Tom Mingus, is spending a lot of time digging through, rooting around. So you'll be able to see all these different tools and techniques that you can use. And a lot of it is very inexpensive. And all of it has a fantastic return on investment. So tune in on the 12th at 1 o'clock. So we're a little bit over our time, but thank you very much for joining us. And please do send your other questions. Needless to say, I'm a nerd for this stuff, and I really enjoy it. I consider it a lot of fun. So thank you guys for joining us. Go forth, good luck, and God bless. Bye-bye.